Welcome back. All right, so I want to talk about playoff hockey in comparison with regular season hockey. As we've been reminded over the last 10 days, playoff hockey is, I think we can all agree, better than regular season hockey. And regular season hockey is miles better than preseason hockey. So there's that. It's one of the reasons why when preseason hockey's on in September, it's hard for me to get into it. Where I'm like, this is not the kind of hockey I was watching last time out. So at any rate, the first round is usually the one that features the heaviest hitting. And therefore, I think it's also the series that's the hardest to officiate. When you have so many hits, you're going to have more borderline hits. You're going to have hits that referees don't see. You're going to have hits behind the play. There's a lot of stuff that goes on. There are instances we've seen in these playoffs where somebody's down on the ice and the camera didn't see it. So the camera following the play didn't see it, and the officials may not have seen it either. And so then we get a replay. Somebody somewhere has somebody's camera was on that play. And then the discussion of who missed it and who messed up, or is that a penalty, starts to come into it. So I wanted to look at hits and compare the hits per game, and that's per 60 minutes, because it can't just be per game because of the fact you have double overtimes in a couple of instances. So that's going to skew the numbers. So I had to go by per 60 minutes. And across the board, the numbers are up, to the surprise of no one. But what's the surprise is how dramatic a difference it is. So, for instance, the Winnipeg Jets, who are not like a really heavy, hard-hitting team during the season, they were throwing hits at a rate of 21.68 per 60 minutes during the regular season. During the postseason, it's 56.85 hits per game. On the Vegas side, they are the second highest hitting team in the league in the playoffs at 49.49, and during the regular season, they were at 23.17. So that means over a 60-game period of a game, you're watching a 60 or over 60 minutes, you're going to get 105 hits or 106 combined hits. So the heavy hitting series, Winnipeg, Vegas. And I think if you've been watching that series, yeah, that adds up. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you have Minnesota and Dallas, where they're throwing an average of 57 hits combined during a 60-minute period, whereas during the regular season, they were throwing an average of 41, and with Winnipeg and Vegas back as that example, it would have been 44 during the regular season. So teams amp it up in the playoffs. And then you look at 3 and 4 when you're looking at hits per game. You've got Tampa at 46.07 for Tampa, Toronto at 43.66. Whereas during the regular season, Tampa was at 24.47 and Toronto at 21.45. So while Toronto gets a lot of discussion about whether or not they're a soft team and all this, I don't see it. I don't. There are other seasons where maybe, yes, I could have gotten around to that way of thinking, but not now. And then you look at power play percentages that are here, and you also look at power play time on ice per game. And it is interesting that we see this dramatic increase in hits, but we don't necessarily see that dramatic increase in power play time per game. It does go up for most teams, but not for all. As for instance, Edmonton, they're throwing 40.32 hits per game. LA's throwing 42.8 hits per game. During the regular season, Edmonton was at 22.64 and LA was at 20.93. So Edmonton was ahead of LA during the regular season, but during the playoffs, LA's ahead of Edmonton. But now what's interesting too is that when you look at the power play time, the Oilers are at 3 minutes and 47 per game and LA's at 6 minutes and 45. Now, it is worthy of note that yes, once you've scored on that power play, that means that power play is done, so that may skew those numbers. And a 54.6% on the power play number for the Oilers tells you, yeah, this is a team that scores pretty early in their power plays, and for LA at 29.4%. But that 54% means that if you take a penalty against the Oilers and you're the Kings, odds are they're going to score, which will absolutely cause fans to get more upset, because it does feel kind of rough when you see your team playing really well 5-on-5, and then when they're penalty killing, they're not as good. As if, for instance, from last night, Minnesota and Dallas. Dallas wins that game by winning the special teams battle, and of course that leads to more scrutiny when it comes to the penalties that are called, the penalties that aren't. And as I mentioned in that recap last night, I felt like both teams had arguments about what was or wasn't called. The last game between Toronto and Tampa, neither coach was happy during a lot of that game. But again, because of which team wins, which team hits on the power play, which team has that special teams advantage, you will have that impression of that was a game that was definitely helped by officiating rather than saying, I really wish the penalty kill had come up with a kill there. It's easier when you're looking at a team that you are fanatically devoted to be able to say the reason they lost the game was, and be able to point to an external reason. So in other words, if your team loses a series, you can say, well, they didn't really lose it because officials took it away, or there was this play that wasn't called. This goal shouldn't have counted. That goal should have counted. And then you get into the weeds of all that. And I do see that as kind of, for lack of a better term, I think coping mechanism is a proper term there. And I've done that myself. I've gotten away from that as I've gotten older. It's why after a game I do my best not to get into the whole officiating side of it, because it is kind of a part of that. The team always has that option of, finding a way to kill that penalty. I'm always, impressed when a team gets a penalty called against them that they shouldn't, and then they just kill it off. And especially if it's a kill where they just don't even allow the other team to set up. That's really impressive. And then, of course, you can get a momentum shift from that. So if we look at power plays in the playoffs, the Islanders struggling at 8.3%, but they were struggling coming into the playoffs at 15.8%. For Carolina, it's kind of the other way. They were struggling coming in, 19.8%, which is still better than the Islanders, but during the playoffs, 26.3%. So when you're looking at that difference in percentages right there, yeah, you'll look at that and say, so Carolina's definitely winning that part of the battle in that series, and that can be that tipping point, because 5-on-5, most of these series have been pretty even. Most of these series have been close. Now, you can point to Colorado and Seattle in a couple of those games, and especially when Colorado gets going, and say, oh, it looks like men versus boys. But in general, that's not the case. And when Seattle's got their game going and they've got a really good forecheck, they can hold their own as well. But I'm already seeing reports on, now Seattle's seeing what they have to do if they're going to get over the hump. Yeah, it's only year 2, so I think they're in pretty good shape. I think they're doing pretty well. So the interesting thing to me is that we do see hits. In the case of the Jets, they're almost triple. Even here with the Rangers, they've gone from 23.78 hits per game to 29.43. So in the regular season, the range of penalty minutes per game was 12 minutes and 31 seconds was the highest. The lowest was 7 minutes and 18 seconds. In the playoffs right now, the team averaging the highest, 29 minutes and 40 seconds. The lowest, 6 minutes per game, which is Seattle. So they're not taking penalties, and Colorado isn't capitalizing either. They're not getting power play goals, which again, if you're down 2-1 and Colorado's power play hasn't hit yet, that's got to be kind of scary. But 12 of the 16 teams in the playoffs right now are averaging more than 12 minutes and 31 seconds of penalties per game, meaning that we get these extra hits, we get these extra penalties as well. And so during the regular season, it's one game out of 82. It's not a series. Your life isn't on the line as a team in the playoffs, and now it is. And so all the interest goes up. We have a lot more eyeballs per game. I mentioned that recently too, and it just feels like, everything is so much more important. And so the importance is out there. These players go out there, they play really hard. And again, we will see more hits that are borderline as a result. These guys are skating faster. They're finishing their hits with more regularity than during the season. And it is part and parcel of the game. But I will say this. I will agree with people that we do see officials in other sports talking after the game. I don't think it would hurt the National Hockey League. If you don't want to put an individual referee out in front of the press after a game, fine. If you don't want to have a situation where they're having to answer for this call and that call and all this, then have somebody from the league the morning after. Do like a morning after interview where you can compile things and just be honest and just say, yeah, this stuff got missed, or we think this is the standard. I think what frustrates fans at times isn't just necessarily what is or isn't called. It's that the standard does seem to change. And I understand that the standard changes come playoff time. I have watched hockey since the early 80s, and what's a penalty in October is not a penalty in April and May. I have never been a huge fan of that, but I've accepted it. I've accepted it because that's always been the NHL's modus operandi. And again, I'm going back to the 80s, so this is not a Bettman thing. This predates Bettman. This is something that, as far as I know, goes back to Gordie Howe's days, that basically it was a free-for-all come playoff time. and you let the players settle it on the ice. We always hear that, right? Let them settle it. Let the players settle it. The referees don't want to get involved. They don't want to play. They don't want to play a role. The problem I've always had with that argument is something simple. So let's say I'm the ref. I'm out there on the ice, and I call something in October, and then in April that exact same play happens, and I go, I'm not going to call that. I have now directly influenced the reaction of that team. I have now directly influenced the potential outcome of that game because now that team doesn't get a power play. That hit is now okay, or that cross check is now okay. And so now that team can keep doing cross checks. They can both do cross checks. You're going to limit scoring chances, which some people love that. Some people really think that makes for a better game. But you've changed that standard. And again, the league doesn't come out and say it, right? So we'll have officials that come out and say, yeah, we're not going to call, yeah, we even things up. We like to keep things fair. But my argument against that has always been, so I'll use Carolina and the Islanders as an example. There was the game where Carolina's 1-for-6. The Islanders didn't have a power play, and it was just chaos in the comments about that. I don't have a problem with that necessarily if there's 6 legit power plays and if there wasn't a legit reason for the other team to have a power play. I'm not saying that's what that game was. I'm just saying I don't have a problem with it. I've never thought that every team should have an equal amount of power plays because not every team plays an equally clean game. And definitely with the playoffs, yeah, there are some teams that are dirtier than others. There are some teams that are cleaner than others. And it doesn't always reflect in the numbers. It doesn't always reflect on the power plays. And this is where I think if they had some kind of day after, okay, here's this game, we'll talk about this, and just do it as a press conference. And just do it as a press conference. You do it over Zoom. You can have all your highlights set up. You can have them saying at 16 minutes and 43 seconds of this game in the second period, there was this play. Can you tell us why this wasn't called? Can you tell us why this was called? You could have the league saying, we talked to, and name the referee about stuff. And if they don't want to do that, fine. But it's out there. We're always going to be having this discussion. And the game is completely different right now than it was 2 weeks ago in the regular season. There is no comparison between the amazing playoff hockey we're watching and the regular season. And I love the regular season too. But man, by the time it was over, I was really glad it was done because I knew the real hard-hitting hockey was coming. But it also involves more hits, and that's where the Department of Player Safety comes in. Because it does feel too, and I get this, and this goes back to Brian Burke. Brian Burke would say, well, if you suspend a guy for 2 playoff games, that's the equivalent of 6 regular season games, or however it was. I think it was 1 and 3. But should it be? And that's a question we can ask ourselves. Should a player get, so for instance, we saw Bunting get 3 games, so that would have been 9 during the regular season? I don't know that it would have been 9 during the regular season, but we don't have that communication between the Department of Player Safety and the public, and I think we should. Like, if the argument is, and maybe on some level the NHL looks at it and says, well, we don't want to have, negative reaction from fans and give more fuel to the fire and more reason for people to be upset. But it's already there. And the silence, regardless of the reasoning behind it, ends up looking damning in the interim, right? As the playoffs roll along, you get into your quarterfinals, your conference finals. I still call them quarterfinals. I'm old. I'm so old, I tell you. And then you get into your final, right? So as the playoffs roll along, generally you're going to have fan bases that drop out. You're going to have people that say, all right, well, my team's out, so see you in October. There's definitely, I see that a lot on the channel. But the reality is that you're still going to have all those extra eyeballs on those series as time goes on. And while the noise may not be as loud when you have 4 series rather than 8, it's still there. The controversies are still there. I don't want to see it become a league where we're getting reviews for absolutely everything. There are times, though, that those reviews, it feels like they're too long. Because again, if you need 5-10 minutes to figure out whether or not that toe was on the blue line or not on the blue line and it's offside, odds are that offside did not influence the play. And if that offside was, say, 1.5 minutes before the goal went in, odds are it probably didn't influence the play. there should be some common sense that's in with these decisions, I think. And I think there should be some kind of established standard. I had to put that on the board because it's something that I think is important. There are certain leagues where you'll see something and go, well, that's going to be 2 games. That's going to be 4 games. See what he did there? That's going to be a few games. In soccer, you have your yellow cards, your red cards, and certain amount of red cards, and then you're automatically going to be suspended. I don't think the NHL will ever go to a yellow card, red card system. I don't think it would hurt to have an egregious foul decided to be like a yellow card. It doesn't have to be a full-on yellow card. Although if the NHL goes that way, I have a yellow card and a red card. I'm all ready. But the reality is that you have to have some kind of standard, right? So that we know, where they say, all right, this is going to be this is going to be that. And I understand that with hockey and with the speed at which it's played, that not all incidents are created equal, but we should have a standard. It should feel like there's a standard and that it's being followed at all times. So it is. I thought it would be interesting just to look at just from a hitting perspective how the hits have picked up for everybody, and that the penalty minute time seems to have gone up, and some teams are excelling on the power play and some are struggling. And for the teams excelling on the power play, and again, we've got Edmonton at 54.6, Dallas at 43.8, Boston's at 28.6, as opposed to the 9.1% for Florida. If your team is against a team that has a absolutely lethal power play, it's going to feel pretty rough. Because again, 5-on-5, you're right there with them. And as soon as they go to the power play, you're in trouble. And so those plays that cause the power plays get more scrutiny. I do my best not to get into the weeds on every single call, but I know there are those that do. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through, you just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I'll talk to you again soon.